So today I'm going to show you guys how to use masking in a couple different ways on two different images. So here, in the first image, what I'm going to do is start working on the metal bell because that's one of your projects, and I wanted to show you a little bit about masking with this piece. So what I'm going to do is first use the Elliptical Marquee tool to draw a circle so that this circle is symmetrical, the circle of the bell, the overall shape. And then I'm going to fill that in with the background color because I'm going to be layering over that. So now I have layer 1, and what I can do to that layer is deselect it and make something that's called a mask. So it's usually easier to do this when you already have something painted or drawn. Doesn't matter how much detail there is. Usually you want to make a mask when you need to sort of isolate the selected shape and the specific shape that you want to paint into. So in order to do that, as you saw down there, I clicked on the little mask icon while my layer with the tan circle was selected. And now, in order to make a mask, there's several ways to do it, but one of the quickest ways I find is just using the magic wand tool, selecting your object, and then going up to select and hitting inverse. Then you just fill in the background with black. And why black? The reason I fill in the background with black is because, as you can see here, now the little masking layer that's attached to my original layer in that row has a little black in the background and a tiny white circle where our object is. So that's basically a mask. I mean, if you think in terms of watercolor, when you put down tape, or if you put down masking fluid and you paint over it, it's not going to affect anything underneath it. So think of the black as the tape, what you're not going to see, or what you're masking off in your painting. And think of the white as the white of the paper, what you are going to see. And in this case, it's the little tan circle at the beginning of the bell. So now we can go back to this image, and I'll show you another little example of it. It's better to see it happen again, just so you can understand how it works. I'll go to my brush, and now I'm going to paint over here to reveal the little reference photo. So what I want to do is switch to black. Oops, gotta have the layer. Oop, there you go. Gotta get rid of that. So what I want to do here is just go back to the mask area, which is down here, the second masked part of this layer. And with white selected, I'm just going to bring this little reference out so I can see what I'm doing. And I also just wanted to do this because I wanted to show you how it works, basically. So if I switch to black, then it's going to do this, as you see here. It's going to mask everything off and put white back onto the image. But if I switch back to white, I can get rid of that. So that's all we need for now. I just need to see that one bell. I'm not going to do multiple bells. Now what I want to do is start painting this little strip or band that goes across the bell. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to deselect, and then I'm going to go to the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to basically draw that in. So that there's a little bit of a curve. We can modify that later since it's its own layer. Going down over here, and a little bit of a bevel there. We can always fix that later. Stop there, and then continue to draw the rest of the band over here. So now what I can do is make a mask for this as well, or I can just paint it normally. But the fact remains that this layer can be modified as well. So what I'm going to do is add that selection to the mask. So it still stays selected even though I switch to layer 1. Now in layer 1 I'm going to switch to the layer 1 mask. And what I can do is extend this piece. So what I'm going to do next is go to my brush and just sort of add this shape to layer 1. And I'm going to work within the mask so that we pretty much have this all sectioned off. If I put black in there, then when I work on layer 1, it'll only affect the top and bottom of this sphere. So when I go back to layer 2, it gets a little confusing. I can make another layer, another mask layer within that layer. And then you see down here in the black of the mask, there's a little white strip. So what I can do with that is start painting in pretty much any color. Let's say like a gray. And you'll see where it is. But we have to be back on the original layer in order to paint things. If I'm still on the masking layer, then I'm just going to be working on the mask itself and not the actual painting. So I'm going back to the actual painting, the original layer, layer 2, and I'm going to switch to that gray. So you see it's only filling in that shape that I planned out with the polygonal lasso tool. Now I can sort of separate all the objects, and I don't have to sit there and keep reselecting them every time in order to work on them, in order to keep them isolated and differentiated from the other objects I'm working on. Like I can only work on this band now, and it won't affect the sphere. If I switch to the sphere layer, since only the circle is masked off, I'm only working on this top hemisphere and this bottom hemisphere of the little circle for the bell. So I pretty much don't have to make any selections anymore unless I'm doing some subtle rendering inside these shapes. And that's the key to working more quickly. Using masking, I see a lot of people use this almost on every layer. Using masking after you paint an object to just decrease the amount of times you have to go back and make a quick selection or a magic wand selection to paint inside of a shape. So now what I can do is just that. When I paint on layer 1, you'll see that it's really easy to be nice and neat and clean with your lines. So what I'm going to do is switch to a little soft round, about a 79 brush size, and I'm going to add a little bit of this value here. Let's try a little bit of lower opacity. There we go. So now, as I increase the value of that, we have that little glare down there. And I'm going to decrease the opacity to just roughly layer that in. Now what I can do is make a new layer which corresponds to this little layer set of the masked circle and the tan circle. And then I can touch on other objects like this to pick the color, and I can paint those in as well with a little bit of like a hard round pressure size brush. I can add that texture in, I can add that texture in later, but with the pressure size I can really build up those little values there on this new layer, which I can stack any which way I want at any point, since it's its own layer. Then I want a little bit of this. I'm going to make a new layer just for that. Paint in that little shape there, right up to the edge. There's a little bit of that over there. And we're just roughly patching in all the little values and colors. And even when we've done this before, but not with masking, even when I want to put in this little soft value down here, it's very easy because I don't have to make any selections. I just go in there, and let's say I want to go back into layer 1 and do it. Just go in there, go back to layer 1, and lay that in. So that we get that nice little shadow core down there. And there's a little bit of it at the top too, of this hemisphere right here. So we're going to put that in. Not too dark though. There's a little bit right here. And a little bit over here as well, but of a lighter value. And you see how it's not affecting that little gray layer, layer 2, because we masked that off and it's a different layer. So now we're going to darken this up. We're going to switch to this value, make that a little lighter. Let's shrink the brush down a little bit. Make that lighter. And this whole area a little bit lighter still. I'm going to increase the size of this. We're going to make this darker here. Oops. Going to make sure it's clean by going back to this one, which is why we made it in the first place, so that we can go back in there and make this thing look more spherical, just like our very first exercise, which was that three-dimensional sphere. So now, that's enough of that. Let's go to layer 2 and start painting in these values here. And I want a little bit of a harder brush with a fixed width. So I'm going to select the hard round, and I'm going to try to keep that fixed width pretty consistent at the top here. And then I'm going to put in a little bit of that at the bottom, which isn't going to really affect much of the piece. Put that in there. Then we select a little bit of that color. We throw some of that in. And you see how easy it is to do everything within that masked selection. There's a little bit of that over there. And now we just need some darker values in the middle here. We'll put in some highlights underneath that in a little bit. I want a little bit of a gritty texture, so I'm going to select either like a charcoal tool or something like that. Sponge tool, something. Sponge brush rather. Something that makes it look a little more metallic and pitted. And then we're almost done with that central part. There just needs to be perhaps like a little layer. Switch to brush, hard round. Little line here at the bottom, which I can brush in with my hard round. And a little line here at the top, which is more of a highlight, which I can use the same brush to paint. So then we have that, and then if you really want to add some nice detail, I'm going to go down to a tiny brush. And just draw in a little bit of a line in between here. Section that off to differentiate the two strips from each other. And I can even do that over here with the opposite value. Just darken up this little strip and make sure it curves around. And then do the same thing over here. Making sure I put in that nice little curve. And then that's pretty much all set. I just need to add in this little bottom plane here, which I can do with a nice little small brush. I'll bring up the opacity a little bit too. So we can do that now or add that in later, it doesn't matter. And if we were to add that in later, I would just make a new layer. And this would just add that more opaque value into the piece. We could even do it with the polygonal lasso tool. Adding in a rough little sketch for it, and now I'm just going to clean it up a little bit with the eraser tool. So let's worry about that later, but what we want to do is go back to layer 1, add in some more of these values here with a pretty big brush, and mostly a soft round. And then we're going to turn the opacity down for the edges so it sort of blends in, but it's not affecting the layer next to it, which is masked. Then I'm going to paint in this little hole here with the pressure brush. Make sure it's pretty dark, so I'm going to start with just full opacity. and then there's a little bit of a tapering there at the end, and the top of the object. What I want to do next is highlight the edge where the light is catching the very rim of that hole. So I'm going to decrease the size of my brush and just make sure I highlight that rim. And it's very important because that makes it look more realistic, and it makes this, little hole in the bell look more like some sort of hole that was cut into the original object. So then we want to put a little bit of gray in there, and I want a little bit of a bigger brush, and switch the pressure brush to a soft pressure brush. And I'll come in here with a little bit of gray, and I'm stippling a little bit as I brush my strokes in. But I want to keep this tan because that's basically what's being reflected around the object. I might want to lighten things up a little bit by selecting maybe this value right here, because even with reflectivity you're going to get a lot of different little values and things. And then I'm going to take this color, switch to a bigger brush, and put that color down there without worrying about disrupting that little strip that runs across. And then I'm going to take a little bit of gray, decrease the brush size, and paint a dark gray on top here as a reflection. Increase the size and decrease opacity. And then I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight on the top. With about double that opacity. And some of the highlight's just going to cover that little dark reflection there, but that's okay. A little bit there. And there's still a little here. Then we have more of this gray down here as well. This carries over a little bit over here as well. So I'm going to decrease the brush size and increase the darkness. It's looking pretty good. So I'm going to stipple in some little values up here, and that's basically the top of the bell. This might be a little lighter in value, in which case you could just really quickly go over to the dodge tool and make sure highlights are selected. The dodge tool is the one that looks like a little lollipop, and make sure your exposure is not too much. And you could just brighten that up a little bit. And also this a little bit too. But when your exposure is too much, you get a little bit of a sharper edge. So you don't necessarily want that. So there we go. You could even do the same thing to layer 2. And this works really well specifically on things like metal bells. even though it's not recommended as a tool to darken everything, because it could end up looking really strange. So anyway, that's more or less how you'll do the bell. If you're drawing in those rings, you'll paint them the same way. The same way I painted these little highlights and then thin reflections. You could use the dodge tool on that, especially down here on the right and on the left there, where there's some glare. And then what I would do finally, I'm not going to finish the bottom because it's basically the same thing as the top, same technique. You can take a little bit of like a spray tool or a splatter tool and add in some darks at a really low opacity. So that's what I'm going to do here with a pretty small brush on layer 1. So then you see you have a couple of those little darks there. You want to turn up the opacity for certain little pits and pocks, and you'll have them there as well. But you want to make sure it's the right brush, like a splatter brush. And you don't want the splatter to be too bunched up together. You want it to be a little sporadic. Like a little bit of a dry brush. Oop. There we go. It's working a little better. Put a couple up there. And don't forget you can make your own brushes too. So anyway, that's how you pretty much approach the bell piece. Make sure there's a pretty full range of values. You can always double check your values by going to adjustments and levels, making sure there's a full range and comparing it to those levels there by flattening the image and then going to image adjustments, levels, and increasing, starting with the grays, increasing the darks, the values, a little bit of the darks, the blacks, and some of those lights. So I could go a little brighter, in which case that the test worked, and I could go back in there and do that by hand, because you don't want to use too many levels and too much dodging and burning, because the printout will look really bad, and then you run the risk of your piece looking too photoshopped. The last part of the demo is going to be another masking technique that works with paintings, but also photographs, things you might put on your website or promotional materials if you want to take one of your characters out from a full page illustration or something, but you don't want the background and you just want the character on your website or on a postcard or on your business card. Then you want to isolate that object. And here's a good way to show you how to do that. So what I'm going to do is, let's say this is part of your character, for instance. What you want to do is click on that layer and then click again down here at the little camera-like shape, and that will make a mask. Then you go to your selection tool and make sure you select the quick selection. Then you make your selections here by holding down. And it's okay if we don't select every single little thing. That's part of it. That's part of the exercise here. And then what you want to do is basically fill that in. with your mask. So now what we have is a masked off area right here. So that when we bring in another layer, like the background you choose to use in your promotional materials, for instance, or in the next piece of art, you can see it. And I just chose a sky with some soft clouds. But what we want to do is get rid of these negative spaces between the hair locks and hair spikes. And the best way to do that, the fastest way to do that, is not by selecting every single little one, because they're a little fuzzy, a little nuanced. That will take forever. It's, again, a lot faster to go in there, now that we have the masked layer, and just switch between black and white in the masked little window or panel of the layer, of layer 1. So I'm going to take my soft round pressure brush, bring it down to like a pretty small size, about the size of most of these little negative spaces. And then what I'm going to do is, with my black selected, I'm going to just paint away what I don't want in here. And the pressure brush is great for this, because if you let up on the pressure, you can get both the large areas in between the hairs and the little tiny sinewy tapered spots. And you could even work with different opacities while you're doing this, so that you don't entirely erase everything all at once, and you could make like smoother transitions. And this is how a lot of advertising work is done, and how a lot of promotional materials are done, when the same character or the same object, or the same hair in this case, has to be put into another poster or on a website or on multiple platforms, on social media, for instance. So now you can see, as I erase away, that it's revealing whatever's underneath. Even the clouds, which are that nice light blue. And again, this would take forever if you were to go in there and try to shift select every single little negative space between the hairs. So that combination, it's much, much, much easier to do something like this. And if you make a mistake, if you go too far, and you, let's say, cut off some of this, you can always switch back to the opposite value and put it back in. And then to continue working, switch back to that initial value, so you can unmask everything that you don't want to be masked. So that's pretty much it. See, I want you guys to see masking as a very, very quick and efficient alternative to using the selection tool for everything. And there's many, many things you can do with this. So be creative and try to use it to speed up the process of your pieces. And in the future to make promotional materials and things like that. And just to keep, everything nice and neat. So this is almost done. I would just go in there and continue to just carefully erase away all that little yellow from the original background. And it'll look very, very natural. which is what we want. We want this character and the hair to look like it's part of the scene and not part of the old scene. Alright, so that's that. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, post in the comments for the video. Alright, I will see you next time.